What is that? Wait, is this a lifetime? Oh shit. That's Lois and Cagliostro. Peacock? With a rapier. Wait, is that? Based on that automat. Reminded me of one of the two women that was with the Queen. Or the other one, I mean. Is that her, maybe? The Iron Queen. Interesting. She didn't stagger anywhere from that. I'm looking elsewhere, this is the problem. Ouch. What? Oh fuck, main menu him. What? Okay, that makes sense. I was gonna say that that automat looked a lot like her. Another boss with cool ideas, but it's just filled with too many gimmicks. Like all of these bosses, just so many gimmicks.
You struggle in vain.
Okay, I'm gonna talk about it
dancer.
after this cutscene.
You're not long for this world.
Oh, see how the Aegis turns against its master.
I was gonna say, I don't think she's a straight up murderer, so.
You are not my master, tyrant! You never were!
I am quite happy to concede this point, but what about the Count? Have you forgotten that he gave you life and whispered the order that animates you? Look how he runs, the coward! Do you understand what he has in mind? La pauvre enfant, sleeping so sweetly. She won't be dreaming for long now.
Croissant! Athenaius!
Wait, Athenaius is still alive? Wait a minute.
Don't move!
The time has come to set you free, Aegis. This whore's soul has poisoned
Oh,
your
I was gonna
cause
say,
for
like...
too long.
Yeah, she's
Adieu,
controlling Aegis, right?
sad puppet.
Aegis, why is she not doing anything?
Antidivine. I don't want to die.
I still don't know if she's actually controlling her.
Athenaius. The sun is rising. And you have slept for far too long. The beauty of this world longs for you. Just as you long for its light. For you are like the flowers that open in the morning. I know you, mon ami. We loved each other. Vous en souviens-t-il?
Wait, now I'm getting even more confused.
You gave
They are
me
not
your
the same
heart.
person?
So please, let me give you mine today.
Metaphorical?
Vivez heureuse, Athenaius. For it is happily that I leave this world.
This way, monsieur.
Monsieur, we have the king. It is now up to us to wield his scepter. In this trying time, crucial decisions must be made without delay.
First and foremost, we must take back Paris.
And how do we do that, mon Dieu? There are automats everywhere, and they are constantly regenerated by their crimes.
We have the king. Cagliostro has fled, but he is leaving a trail of blood. I doubt he will survive his injuries. As a result, the automats are left to their own devices, with no one to give them orders and no reinforcements. And since I'm sure that Parisians will no longer venture out into the streets, the machines will soon have no more souls to harvest. Sooner or later they will no longer be able to move and, par la grâce de Dieu, will become inanimate objects again. It's a matter of days, weeks at most.
Mais ensuite, once peace has been restored, what of the kingdom?
This is indeed a crucial issue. Leaving the nation without a government would expose it to the greatest danger.
Worse, it would condemn it to civil war.
Eh bien quoi, monsieur? Can you not govern together?
Unfortunately, the disagreements that divide our assembly run far too deep. That which we can agree is that we have been given a chance to choose the person who shall succeed the tyrant.
I believe I am the person who is best suited to exercise power. Of course, I will only hold office for as long as it takes to set up a new assembly and a government of the people. For the French will no longer tolerate a king. We can be sure of that.
Are you joking? What have you done that would convince us to let you take down the monarchy?
Answer, Monsieur de Robespierre. You have our full attention.
Monsieur, I rest my case.
Very well. We must now make our decision. I pray that each of us shall respect this decision and set aside our personal interests for the sake of peace and the common good. Who among you approves the appointment of Monsieur Maximilien de Robespierre? The National Convention welcomes Citoyen Robespierre, Consul of the Republic.
Citoyen Louis de Bourbon, former King of France, in the name of the French people, in light of the innumerable crimes of which you have been found guilty, the members of the National Convention, meeting as an extraordinary court, have voted to sentence you to death. The sentence will be carried out on the hour. Now that justice has been done, the nation is ready to hear your last words.
My loyal subjects, since you must lead a lamb to the altar, since you must offer a sacrifice to this new France that you intend to found, I will be that sacrifice. How dreadful this world is, where beauty is doomed to fade and flesh decays. I found no consolation in this world. I vainly thought I was giving our souls the gift of immortality beyond our mortal bodies. The Grim Reaper was my sworn enemy. Influenced by the most awful of men, I believed that the genius of machinery could overcome death itself. Alas, I have lost this fight, and am branded with a mark of murderer. Life, even more than the crown, was heavy for me to bear. I have suffered too long under the thumb of nature, which I despised. As a child, I saw my older brother die. I lost my father in the prime of his life, and then my mother, who was even younger. My beloved daughter did not live a year. As for my son, the first of my heirs, I unknowingly gave him.
Okay, this has nothing to do with anything. Can you stop blabbering?
I mourn the death of these poor souls daily. My death will not unite us, of this I am certain. For I, in my misery, have lost the support of my faith. So, executioner, lay me down on this board of adieu. I will sleep now. Sleep at last, and not to dream.
Man, that... Fucking hell. The screenplay on those cutscenes was fine, but the presentation was in the wrong order. Like, it was really nice when we got into the point where Aegis gave her life to save Athenataias. But after that point, getting to that jump forward to the king being executed in front of the people, that one kind of just completely like ruined the feeling that we got from Aegis's departure earlier. So I feel like if they went in the exact opposite order and then the game would end on Aegis giving her life away. If they somehow just flipped it around, I feel like this would be better. Fucking hell, why does this game have to be so like... Why does this game have to be so like lack of finesse and like mediocre? Because like this story and the way for most of it how it's presented is actually excellent. Like it's really interesting, especially on first playthrough or on a single playthrough. But because of all the jank of this game and the lack of finesse that this game has on just about everything, down to from the movement, to the graphics, the compatibility and all that, it ruins the game to its core. Okay, let's talk about the last boss now, because I didn't get to say anything about that. I feel like, as I was saying, there's so many gimmicks with bosses in this game. Normal enemies are, I mean, they are reskinned to fucking hell. Like, normal enemies, it's just like... The reason why killing the normal enemies didn't get boring to me, exactly, was because of, like, it not being, like, intentionally frustrating or difficult at any point. It's like... In Lords of the Fallen, let's take an example of a game that has very good finesse for most part, but the game suffers from reskinning enemies a lot like this game does. So in Lords of the Fallen, as to why the game feels frustrating with reskinned enemies, it's because the enemy density as well as the genuine feel of unrest that you have at every point in that game, you never feel like you can actually take it easy in that game, or be at ease, literally speaking. There's always something in that game, whenever you're playing through an area, that makes you anxious when you play. You never like lose this feeling of unrest when playing the game. But in this game, it's paced a lot more like an actual Souls game, with where enemies are placed and how many enemies there are placed. So even though they are reskinned to hell, fighting them doesn't become exhausting or frustrating at any point, because they are placed more carefully, and the combat of the game is fun enough to the point where it doesn't get boring, at least for the amount of hours that I played it here on this first playthrough. Like, it was interesting enough, but like, it's simple, but it wasn't like, you know, it didn't get boring is what I mean. It kept being enjoyable. But this game definitely would do a lot if they just, you know, didn't reskin so many enemies, just create more like brand new stuff. And when it came to the boss fights, this game has no fucking idea. The devs in this game have no idea how to make a boss fight. They genuinely just don't. The only boss fights that had any feeling of like this is actually like a challenge or like an event that is important was that last one, and that's because of the context as well as the music and the name of the boss. But there was a couple bosses earlier in the game, like the horse boss in the mines that I killed yesterday, where the boss itself had a lot of like melee attacks, as well as the very first boss that I killed second day when I played this game. That boss with the frost attacks, where I got the frost skill from, that boss had a lot of melee attacks, so it was actually pretty fun to fight because of that. But it was mostly simple, but it was a lot more interactive than most of these games. And even that last boss, like, there is a lot of cool ideas with what they did with its attacks. Obviously the design is like, I don't think the design is a problem here, like what the boss itself looks like. and the rigging on the bosses is also really nicely done, in my opinion, for what this game is trying to portray. But it's literally just like, what do you need the boss to do, which is the problem. Lords of the Fallen has the same thing as well, the new Lords of the Fallen that I played. Like, so many bosses in these two games, they just do too many like things just to like be unique from like the normal enemies. So like example of this would be like there's a normal enemy with like a shield and spear that we fought so many times in this game. Like those enemies, they have a shield and spear, you expect them to use the shield and spear like a partisan, you know. So, you know, hold the shield up and attack at the same time or whatnot, you know, the usual that you would expect an enemy that has a shield and spear, right? And yeah, that's mostly what it was. But, you know, they attack exactly as you expect. But then we get into these bosses, and like you see the last boss like there. I'm not even sure what weapon the last boss had, the Iron Queen. I don't even know what weapon she had, but she had something sharp on the right hand, right? It's like a big slice of like a fan, you know, the one that you use to cool yourself, right? The fancy aristocrats use. Like one of those maybe on the right hand. And she barely used it at all. Like she mainly used it to like summon some sort of like range or like magic attacks or something. And if we go to like a fundamental level of how to make an enemy, like there has to be a reason from several perspectives as to why you make an attack on a boss. Now, the most important, at least in my opinion, when it comes to bosses, especially in Souls games, is that the attack has to serve some purpose to what you want the player to do while fighting the enemy. So an example of this would be, let's take like, what would be like a good one? Well, I'm gonna go with the first thing that came to my mind, like let's say Sekiro Genichiro, for example, or Ishin. You know, two very high quality bosses from a good game, right? From a very good game. So if you play far range from, say, like Genichiro on his fight in Ashina Castle, then he's gonna shoot with his bow, and after shooting with his bow, he can dash at you and do one of his red attacks with the Perilos punish that you can either punish with dashing into him using that counter mechanic, which name I forgot, but it's gonna come back to my mind. Point is that the bow as well as the launching attack that he has serves a purpose of closing the distance between a more passive player that is trying to heal, for example, or trying to just play from range and wait for attacks that are easily punishable. Those attacks are supposed to punish the player for the player being inactive in the fight, for playing too slowly or too passive. And then when you get really close to Genichiro, for example, then he does one of his combos that can be a kick at the start, which you obviously have different timing to deflect, so you can so easily deflect it. So the idea with something like a kick on his start combo, for example, is so that the player cannot just sit on his face as easily and just force deflect the character. So one attack pattern serves the purpose of making sure the player doesn't like playing too inactive in the fight, and the one pattern serves a purpose that the player should not feel too comfortable being too close to the boss. So so these two attacks, or patterns of attacks for those ranges when fighting the player, they serve a purpose in the fight. Now, that is really important because it changes like significantly how the boss feels the fight and the challenge that it does for the player. And now, when we compare that to the final boss of this game, the Iron Queen, that I just fought, like, so often I felt really comfortable being either really close to the boss or being far away from the boss. That goes also for every single boss in this game. Like, not at any point when I'm close to the boss and it's not immediately doing something, or when I'm far away from it and it's not doing something, I always feel totally fine and I don't think anything is gonna happen, because that's how the game has taught me to believe when fighting any bosses in this game. And that is really bad, because that... How do I put this in the words exactly? It's kind of like... Well, it just goes back to the gimmick mechanic. Like, you know, if you want every single attack that the boss has to, like, invoke a certain reaction from the player or just be like very different from normal enemy attacks, then the bosses just end up feeling like they are just like events that you just topple over in a few tries, because they are trying to be something that just doesn't make sense when it's just one enemy, you know? Actually, that's a pretty good comparison too. Like, if we had like a melee, more like a melee enemy with, say, like that Iron Queen, and then we have the Iron Queen spamming the range attacks, you know, that would actually be a more fine duo fight, as is. And then another thing with this game and Lords of the Fallen that I also don't like a lot is that when I said that, you know, something like Genichiro has like these kick attacks and these more unpredictable attacks at close range that you can't so easily like deflex spam, so it forces the player to like be more discreet with how close to the, you know, boss you play. For example, in the Genichiro fight, the Sekiro. So in this game, when you play close range to almost any boss, the solution from the developers is almost always just have the boss sit there and charge like an AoE attack of some kind. And that gets insanely boring. Because what is the purpose of an enemy that is charging an AoE attack? Well, first of all, because of how cheap it is to dodge, if not impossible in most circumstances, because the point of an AoE explosion or attack when it comes to any enemy is to force the player off the enemy's melee range. That's the purpose that the attack serves. Because the developers don't want you to be that close at that moment, so they want you to back off from the boss and take your time, right? It creates distance with the boss and it gives the boss more time to do auto attacks. Well, here's the problem with this game's chunk, for example. Let's say that the boss does an AoE attack. After the AoE attack, if you walk close to the boss doesn't do something fast enough to, like, you know, gets anything done. You just go back to the close range of the boss and then you're just slapping it all the same. Which is why I still believe that the best boss in this game that I killed was actually the Frost enemy yesterday. The Frost boss yesterday, the reason why that enemy in particular forced me to play different against the AoE attacks and whatnot was because the Frost on the ground as well as the weapon, how the weapon on the boss worked, leaving the Frost on the ground as well as having a small lingering hitbox on every strike that it did on the ground. It made it so that it forces me to not be comfortable standing close to the boss or on a certain place. So it gives the boss more time to do more attacks, so the fight in turn becomes more interactive. Because then I have to sometimes take some time to wait for my turn, so to speak, to find the boss in a more vulnerable position to be able to attack it. Now that is not fundamentally always good design, especially in like Lords of the Fallen, for example. Again, there's many bosses in Lords of the Fallen that force this exact mechanic, and it gets super redundant, and when every single boss does that mechanic instead of just being like a one-off thing. Okay, let's do another example with Sekiro. So, in Sekiro, for example, in the Fountainhead Palace, when you kill, or when you fight them, what is it? The fucking dragon boss, I forgot its name. Is it the Divine Dragon? Oh, it's, you know the one I mean. You fight the dragon boss at the end, and in the second phase, there's this one frenzy attack after you have refracted enough lightning with your sword back at the dragon, where the dragon becomes furious, deletes all the like trees away from the boss, and that basically forces an event or an encounter with the boss for the next like 25 seconds or so, where your main focus is literally just to survive the attacks. Like, it's supposed to be entertaining, it's supposed to be exciting, it's supposed to be like a thing that gets the player like nervous, you know, sweating a bit, while also being cool at the same time, and the music amps up as well. Like, the moment is really nice, and it doesn't like outlast itself to the point where it becomes annoying to play, you know? It's just the correct length, right? And it happens rarely enough where it doesn't become like the core mechanic of a fight, like it does in Lords of the Fallen or in this game with many enemies as well. Well, bosses, that is. So my point being here is that if these developers just created bosses that had more of an say almost like a fighting game 1v1 aspects on them. You know, like Sekiro does, where like you find a small opening between the boss's attacks, and then after you have punished the small opening, or more like a Dark Souls boss maybe, and then after you have punished the small opening, then you have to evade a couple of the boss's attacks, maybe back to back, maybe like a one combo or like one attack, and then you can attack again. Although this game has a lot of trouble having that, because of the fundamental mechanics of how the combat works from the player character. Because Aegis is so like locked onto every attack that she does, you cannot like cancel your attacks into roll, and you also cannot cancel your attacks into parrying, for example, or using a special move. So what that does is it forces the developers to not have as like, how do I say, like as intensive fights in terms of like speed of the enemies, or of like how much like they back and forth fighting between an enemy goes, because you simply do not have enough free frames to be able to react to something like that as the player character, because you are so like fundamentally locked onto attacks and moves in this game. So that's like one of the fundamental mistakes that this game has in its clunky combat of many things. But if they change that, then the developers would have noticed possibly that they could design more like enemies in this game, just not bosses only, with more like fighting game elements of back-to-back fighting, like in a more traditional Souls game, where you dodge like one attack, then you attack back, and then the enemy attacks you again, you dodge again, and so and so. But this game has less of that, and it's more like you wait till the enemy does its combo or attack, and then when they are open, then you just wail at them. In fact, every single fight with any enemy almost in this game that you see on the board of my stream in the past 4 days has basically been, I either parry an enemy's attack and then I just spam R1 or couple R2s at it and it's dead. That's basically every single fight. But that's not to say that Souls games also don't do that. But then again, in Souls games, when they do that, that comes down to player skill a lot. Because let's take an example of like some like really basic enemy from a Souls game. So say like Dark Souls 3, let's take one of the basic hollows you find at the start of the game before even killing the tutorial gunner. Like ones with the broken sword we're talking about, like one of those. So it flails an attack, you R1 with a weapon that doesn't break its poise automatically. Well, almost every weapon breaks poise in DS3, maybe not the best example, but well, let's say you get one attack off, and then you stop because you aren't confident enough or whatever, you are just too bad at the game at the time because it's your first Souls game or whatnot, and then the enemy attacks you again, you dodge it, and then you kill the enemy. But now if we make like a comparison between this and Dark Souls 3, you know, a more experienced player that has played the game for a bit, you know, you dodge one attack and then you like do 2 R2s, the enemy's dead, right? It's kind of the same with this, but it just takes a lot more hits. So if we go to like a comparison of how the, you know, gameplay pattern works, is actually quite a lot the same, but it doesn't feel the same. So even though it looks a lot the same, it doesn't feel the same, and that makes a huge difference, obviously. Anyway, I was going for something with this ramble, and here we are. I wonder what happens if I click this New Game Plus, or continue for that matter too. Should I find out? I guess it's just gonna kick us into... I mean, it has to kick us into New Game Plus. What else can it do? I mean, Aegis is literally dead. So, like... if we press this, it's just gonna start New Game Plus. Also, this New Game Plus option was grayed out last time. I guess my point being, I feel really bad for this game. I genuinely feel bad for this game. I feel like if they gave this game like another year at least of just baking time, of just fixing all the technical shit that this game has in it, and just change some mechanics fundamentally from the player character and speed up the enemies or something, I feel like this game could actually be a very fine game, honestly. Especially on first playthrough, could be a very fine game. It is such a shame. It is such a very big shame. It's like it's the same exact thing I felt with Ghost of Tsushima, except Ghost of Tsushima is a lot more close to a very good game, that game. It's still a good game, obviously, you know. I would be delusional if I didn't say the game isn't good, but what I am saying is that if they changed just few things with how they did everything in the game. More responsive controls, especially when stance switching. That's like my main complaint, honestly. Like that's basically like the only complaint behind the gameplay itself. The gameplay is otherwise really excellent in the game, but it's just like, I don't know, is it like PS4 just being fucking janky with 30 frame rate? The game was literally developed for PS or on PS4. Like, it was released right about the time when PS5 came out, but it was developed for PS4 before that. So the game should run flawlessly on a PS4, right? Because that's what it was originally literally designed for. But it actually doesn't. So, like, that's a huge problem. But anyway, if we don't go to that problem, then, you know, a game like Ghost of Tsushima had the problem where the presentation of the cutscenes and the screenplay and, well, I don't want to say the voice acting exactly, but there is a lot of, like, reused, like, same voice actors for so many, like, side characters in the game, like, as well as even faces. Like, it actually gets a little bit, like, silly, you know? But, you know, they're cutting corners somewhere, obviously. And also the format, or, well, that goes back to the presentation of how the story or the cutscenes are presented to the player. Like, it gets really uninteresting to follow what is happening. But this game, for example, like, even though there's problems obviously with the presentation as well, not so much with the screenplay, which is actually surprisingly fine. The rigging of the character is really fucking bad, by the way, though. The rigging is horrendously awful, and the textures are very bland on the characters' faces especially. But that could be passed for just, you know, not going for as real graphics or whatnot. But the rigging is inexcusable. The characters just move so fucking weird in the cutscenes, as well as the background lighting that they have is non-existent, so it basically, like, encloses you to the space, which could be honestly a thematic choice, to be fair, so let's not scrutinize that too much. But this game's story, my point is, this game's story feels interesting to follow. Like, that was the main reason why I even continued with this playthrough. Like, well, I knew it was super janky from the get-go, but immediately when I, like, started seeing, like, some of the first cutscenes and the first boss fight on the second day when I played this, I immediately knew at that point I wanted to see where the story goes, at least. So that's, like, the one factor that made me want to continue even this game. But yeah, the story is, like, story and the screenplay is like it is compelling. It genuinely is. But having the actual, like, gameplay and all the fucking jank that comes with it, the lack of finesse, it is such a shame that this game is in this state. It really is.